So I think in a lot of ways it can be very overwhelming. And I hear a lot of my colleagues and PR pros say this, that there are so many more platforms with the proliferation of Substack, influencers, you know, niching down of some of the, and there still is, of course, a lot of legacy media. I think I've heard that it's like my reading has doubled, I can't keep up, yada, 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 which I understand. But I really do think it's overall a great opportunity for smart publicists because you can find your niche in a much more in an easy and more effective way now than you ever could before. So, that means really taking the time to research again where your consumer is living, what they're reading, and then personalizing, really thoughtful pitches to those people. And that might be, if it's a beauty product, the beauty editor at Allure, of course, but it may also be a sustainable beauty Substacker with 15,000 subscribers who, many of whom purchase, a ton from that Substack. So, and really trust and read it every week religiously and have built a relationship with this person. So, I think you can honestly generate the same kind of sales from both of those types of coverage.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur Podcast, filled with marketing and leadership tips on launching and growing your business with your host, Deanne Mora.
Today on the podcast, I'll be speaking with PR and marketing consultant Rachel Van Dolsen. Rachel is a PR strategist and brand storyteller who helps entrepreneurs craft compelling narratives and secure meaningful media coverage. After launching her career at LaForce and Nike Communications, she founded RVD Communications in 2012 and grew it into an award-winning agency known for long-term client success. Under her leadership, RVD represented some of the most forward-thinking brands, including Partners Coffee, Brooklyn Cura, W&P, Wild One, Maeve, Foria, Dame, and I could go on. Rachel now works independently as a PR consultant, partnering with early stage founders, solo entrepreneurs, and creative brands. That was a mouthful. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dan. Yeah, that definitely was. Thank you for the rousing intro.
We'll add some musical interlude afterwards. So let's start with your backstory. Can you share how your early fascination with storytelling, even I think you talked about being excessively talkative in school, which I can't imagine having spoken to you, but how did that shape your path into PR?
Yes. So, yeah, my claim to fame is I once had a report card that had 6 excessive talking comments on it. So that's
For you.
basically every class. But yes, I think I've now thankfully turned that into a strength and I've learned to also listen, not just talk. So, yes, I got my start working at LaForce, as you mentioned. And I think what drew me to PR is the storytelling aspect, the fact that you're kind of the mouthpiece for all these different brands if you're in an agency setting, and it's your kind of job, your job to really digest what makes them tick, why this brand exists, what makes them interesting, different, better than the competitors, and kind of find other values aligned mouthpieces to share that. And I just love what I think, what I love about it is the fact that, you're crafting a lot of these great storytelling documents, writing a ton, but you're also then using that to brief others. So there's a big amplification effect to being a good PR professional that I really enjoy. And I love that collaborative aspect as well, that, you're writing, you envision and of course try to reverse engineer amazing stories about your clients, but ultimately then you're putting it in an expert's hands to tell it in their voice, and releasing control. Within reason. But I think it's a fun challenge. And, I think most PR pros would agree that no day is the same. It's lots of twists and turns. So that resilience and, adaptability is also a fun aspect of it.
Absolutely. And even in this crazy age of AI, that, the story is still everything, that's still what people resonate with. So finding that thread that will catch the attention of an audience, whether it's media professionals or a general audience, is obviously really, really key.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned, a good PR person is also thinking about not only what's going to catch the end consumers, what's going to resonate with them, but also really tailoring it to the journalist themselves. So it's kind of a two-pronged thing. You have to be thinking about what does this journalist care about? And then what do their audience care about? And ideally, like you're kind of threading that needle in an elegant way. So no one really knows that you're thinking of all of those things.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And working with LaForce and Nike Communications are obviously really big organizations. How did that influence your PR philosophy as you built RBD?
That's a great question. So, I mean, I learned so much at both places. I think, I also worked with larger brands at both of those agencies. So I worked on some Moet Hennessy brands at LaForce and, and others as well. And then a lot of the Bacardi brands at Nike. I was in spirits when I first started. So spirits and restaurants as well. But yeah, and I mean, I think I learned a ton from, and how to collaborate both internally and externally, how to be client facing, and also how to put your head down and actually do the work as well. So there was a lot of, I think a very fast learning curve. I would almost say like a vertical line learning curve. When I first started in PR, I was used to, I came from, working, being in college and academia. So, realizing that it's not just one paper I'm working on today, it's like 30 different priorities. um, so that was, I think really exciting. And then, when I started my own agency, it really like informed how I trained my team. And I always, company culture mattered a lot to me. Of course, I got a lot better at this as I went on. I started my company at 25, so definitely was a little green at the beginning. But I think at the end of the day, like even in those early days, I really took care of my people and wanted to make training a huge part of what I was building. And I do, and also like because that then translates to a better work, but also better client service, better retention in all aspects. So yeah, I think a lot of that threads back to my early experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned about the balancing that you have to be outward facing with actually heads down and getting the work done. So which leads to building a team, obviously, which is key to scaling. And when you built your team-based agency, you eventually sold it to a Band of Insiders. So what were some of the pivotal moments in that journey for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I started the agency really with the intention of doing great work. Selling it wasn't really on my radar when I first started it. But, as I grew and, realized I was kind of hitting a point where I felt like we were a good size. I had young children. I didn't have it in me to scale to a bigger size. So I thought, and I believe that this is where many founders start to kind of think about what is an exit plan. So yeah, I started kind of looking into what it would be like to sell, and it ended up working out really well, finding someone that would kind of see that vision and ideally give additional resources to take it in a new place. And I was there for the transition, and I think helped to make it as smooth as possible. But ultimately, it came down to realizing that my journey running that agency was probably coming to a close, but I'm going to keep doing this in a different form.
Well, I mean, congratulations, because not every founder gets an exit. So obviously that's a
Thank you. Yeah,
great
I'm
testament
happy.
to
I
the
think
work.
some of it is just, I took a course with Holly Howard, who's a wonderful like a business coach consultant. And in that course, I think this was 3 or 4 years ago, I ended the semester kind of with the realization she had us do like a visioning, experience. And I kind of came out of it with this idea that I wanted to sell within 2 years, and I actually did. So it ended up, I think sometimes it's just realizing, hey, this actually is where I think I'm going, and what are the micro steps I need to take to then get there.
Yeah, hashtag goals, right?
Yeah.
Really super
Or like
important.
manifest, which is a little woo, but
And don't put that down, because that's, I think, a really important
I
part of
mean,
what
I'm a
we all need to
believer.
do. Do whatever it takes, right? It's like
Yeah.
an Olympic athlete, they're manifesting the goal. I mean, we're kind of doing the same thing. You're just visualizing that end result. So nothing wrong with
And yeah,
that.
you're not going to get a result unless you actually say it and start believing it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I
say
do
it
believe
out
it.
loud.
I
That's a
believe
big
in
one.
that stuff.
One. One of the things that you've spoken about is the importance of having clean books and an infrastructure that's organized, and how that helped to position you for acquisition. So what advice would you give other founders, even in other spaces, about kind of knowing when growth begins and when scale becomes a potential exit?
That's a great question. So for me, I was an English and art history major. I am a writer and a strategy person. So I realized that books were never going to be where I was going to be the strongest. So I think, and many founders are differently aligned than that, but know what you don't know and hire someone who can help you that you trust. I think that's my biggest piece of advice is don't, if you're not someone who understands, I mean, of course, I have a general fluency with books. I did my own books the first few years of the company. I don't want to put myself down, but as it came closer to wanting to exit, it was asking the right questions. What do we need to think about in terms of profit margin? How should I be looking into reducing our overhead, blah, 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 whatever it was, understanding what needed to be done to get the books in the right place. But also, of course, understanding that you still have to run your company. So being realistic about all of that. But for me, it was like asking the right questions and letting the experts and like listening to what the experts were recommending, rather than kind of believing that I could figure that out myself.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think, one of the challenges I think that a number of founders face is that when you look at what's the first thing that you want to outsource, I mean, unless you're launching a CPA firm, a lot of them it's the books, right? And so, but there's a difference between outsourcing the execution and outsourcing the ownership, right? So it's like, you might love all the other aspects of your business, you don't love the financials, but if you're not all over the financials,
Yeah,
you're not getting that exit. In fact, you may end up having to take out a loan because you don't even know if you're going to be cash flow positive. So you absolutely have to own it. Has that been your experience?
100%. And that's why, I mean, when I say outsource, I mean, I still was in QuickBooks probably every day. So, very much like you're the founder and the CEO of your company, or if you are the founder and CEO of your company, that's under your domain. You have to fully understand, or at least like close to fully understand where pretty much every dollar is going. And yeah, like I think that's just it's part of it as much as it, for many of us isn't why you get into it. But if you start a business, that's I think very much your responsibility.
Absolutely. Well, if I can quote you for a moment, I saw that on LinkedIn that you asked a question, are we doing the work or just talking about the work, which I thought was really interesting. So what do you think that means for modern thought leadership and how can brands avoid just kind of, I guess, content for the sake of content?
Yes, I love this question. So, I mean, of course, the question is there to stir the pot a little bit. I understand being the face of a brand, and of course, I'm a publicist, so I am pro speaking about your work, using the right mouthpieces to get your message out there, of course. But I think there can be, especially in today's modern thought leadership landscape, there can be a little bit of talking more than the doing, and I think that's when things can get a little messy. So, that might be using vague kind of cliches rather than specific data, specific use cases, not tying something back to a specific, endpoint or, being very clear about what your thesis is and why you're saying that. I think is what really matters rather than just kind of saying something that's a little bit empty. And I think in today's landscape with so much, AI use, which I think is a powerful thing, I'm far from anti-AI, but I think you can kind of lose the details and it can just become a lot of kind of cliches and robot speak, I guess.
It almost becomes too easy in a sense, and so the quality isn't there. I think I'm hearing you say like, opt for quality over quantity when it
Oh,
comes to your content.
always, because I think ultimately look back and, I think having a strong brand and a strong point of view will help you with this. Look back at what your end user or your end consumer, your, ideal potential client, if you're, a service business, what do they care about? And, how can you help them? If you go into it with like a service mindset, I think that's going to alleviate a lot of the potential issues. How am I actually helping the person reading this versus just kind of like giving them a bunch of information that they're just going to forget in 5 seconds. So, let's say you're talking to a solopreneur and you want to talk about PR. Are you going like give them something strategy wise or give them a tactic that worked for a similar business? Give something a little bit more specific that's going to help them. And also, I think that's a lot more sticky in terms of actually remembering, you
Hmm.
know, what you're
Yeah, that's
saying.
true. That's true. But I mean, it's interesting because, when you think of, so if quality is more important than quantity, yet we must serve the almighty algorithm, which
Yeah.
says, I need you on my platform, posting, every day, multiple times a day, engaging. I saw a really interesting master class with one of the Kardashians just talking about building a personal brand. And it's like, be on there, like, be like posting 3 times a day and engage with you. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. So how do you still have a business to run, right? So how do you balance all of that?
That's a great question. So I think ultimately batching content is a great way to go, and then reserving the kind of more ad hoc stuff for newsjacking, talking about something that's actually relevant to your brand that's going on in pop culture. But so not leave like kind of building that into a flow is really helpful. I've seen that work really well for clients. And really trying to systematize it as much as possible is probably the best way to go. Sit down for block your calendar for 2 hours on a Tuesday, and write in 4 different buckets. These are the things I want to talk about over the next couple of weeks. Here's what blah blah blah. Like kind of just go heads down on it, and then reserve a little time in your calendar for that more ad hoc reading, et cetera, which you should be doing anyway as competitive research. So I think that's what I've seen work the best. And then in the PR space, what I do is I block my calendar for a half hour in the morning and a half hour at the end of the day for just plain reading. And sometimes that's very targeted reading with a specific client in mind when I have to go deep. Sometimes it's more, I'm going to read all my Substacks that I haven't read this past week because it can get overwhelming. But it's my job to understand what's going on in the landscape. So I think whatever works for you, but the more you can systematize it, that makes, I think, the content production machine a little bit easier. And it just means the quality will probably be better because you're not just trying to fill it in like in this rush, kind of like panicked way. Like, I didn't do my content this week and it's Friday at 5 or whatever.
Yeah. No, I like that idea of blocking time in your calendar. Like actually it's a yes or yes, got to get it done. Now you mentioned newsjacking, which is obviously a great way to get to expand your reach, but how do you do it effectively?
That's a great question. So I do this a lot with my clients. So I think, you're never going to have 100% hit rate. So I'll say that. Part of newsjacking is the trying, but that could mean, let's say there's a new, you know, one of your competitors is coming out with XYZ and you have something that's different and you want to use that kind of as a springboard to talk about what you have that's a little bit different what they're doing. It could be, news of a government bill that passed, for example. We don't need to get into politics, but something more political that maybe you have a point of view on. And again, it all if you have a strong brand, you'll kind of know what the issue, you should know, not kind of, you should know what the issues are that matter to your brand and your consumer, and that will make it a little bit easier and know what they're reading. So it's you can spend your time kind of finding what those trending topics are and applying them through your own lens. And I think the other thing, in addition to how can I help my audience, the audience who's reading this, ask the question like, why does this matter to my audience? And then kind of work that in to what you're doing as well. And then on the PR side, we tend to like, let's say anything with a celebrity is always a helpful hook. If a celebrity posts something about your brand organically, that's something that you should definitely be leveraging. If a celebrity says something, and again, these should be celebrities that matter to and these can be micro celebrities that matter to your end user. Just keeping an eye on like what you can kind of use that's already around your product, to make it feel more interesting and newsworthy to a journalist now. Because I think that's the biggest hurdle with PR. Something might be interesting, but why isn't it interesting now? That's, I think,
Why is it interesting to your audience? I'm hearing you say
your
the
audience.
importance of really knowing your personas, understanding what they care about so that you're not newsjacking some random
Exactly.
topic. It's something that's important to them.
Exactly. And know why it's important to them. Like, is it because of how it impacts their purchasing decisions? Is it because of, how it impacts their day-to-day life and, the flow of how they live, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it all comes back to thinking like your consumer and thinking like the journalist writing about your consumer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I heard you in there talk about micro celebrities. So let's talk about influencers and how that comes into play and, big influencers, micro influencers. What are your thoughts on using influencers to promote your brand? And maybe you could come up with a couple of examples of smaller companies
Yeah.
because, we can't all afford a tweet by somebody super famous,
Of
right?
course. So I think I was going to say the first question is always like, what is your budget for influencer marketing? And again, you don't need a giant one, but if you're going for those really large influencers, over 500,000 followers, let's say, a million followers, whatever, like a true celebrity influencer or true celebrity, that's going to be a very, very expensive get. Of course, once in a while, someone will get lucky and there will be an organic post, but that is increasingly rare and not something you should be banking your strategy on by any means. So of course, go in knowing what is reasonable with the budget I have. And if you do have a more scrappy startup budget, which, I've dealt with many times because I ran an agency that catered to startups and some of which had more funding than others, but still were mostly bootstrapped, I would say. We would typically look at influencer strategy as more of like, how are we building a relationship with these influencers and treating them like brand ambassadors? So, sending them product, making sure they're genuine fans. If someone is a genuine fan already, approaching them with easy, low lift ways to partner. You can use affiliate links so that they're getting a cut of payment. You can use of the sales they drive. Sorry. You can also there's lots of different ways to monetize it for them. Again, these influencers are also running businesses themselves. So more and more they will, if you're asking for a dedicated asset, like a full TikTok just about your brand or inclusion in a big, these are the 5 best water bottles, whatever it may be, you're probably going to have to pay for that. But what are the ways to make that also positive for them so that they want to include you? So that's giving them exclusive information before it becomes public, giving them new colorways, partnerships with influencers that you think are a perfect fit. So I've seen brands successfully do, full product line collabs with influencers, where it's like a branded revenue split. So there's a lot of creative ways to do it. I think at the end of the day, it's really treat it like a relationship and don't be like, I sent you my, new mouth tape and you didn't post. It's like they get so many packages. um, and so, just because you sent them a sample, it just simply isn't enough these days. It's probably unlikely that they're even the ones opening their own packages. So I think just keep that top of mind. Oh yeah, so I guess that goes into my final thing. Don't send a package unless they say they want it.
So those celebrity swag bags that, say, oh, there's this event and where, you can get your product in a swag bag. I think I'm hearing you say not so great a return
Likely not.
investment.
Likely not. I think there are reasons to do those. So, there are gifting suites that I have seen be somewhat successful if you go in with a specific ROI. So, there are certain events where you can, have your product there in a seating capacity and, some of that you can have a package that includes a photo of the celebrity with your product that you can use in marketing materials. If that's something you think makes sense for your brand and you really believe that it'll convert for you as an ad or whatever, fine, maybe that makes sense. It wouldn't really be my typical recommendation, but I do understand that there are certain brands that does move the needle for. For the most part, though, it's not there's very little that is probably going to a publicist. It's probably going to an assistant. It's very unlikely going to reach the celebrity unless you have a true personal connection or the brand is actually a perfect fit for them. Like if it's a new mom and it's a high-end formula brand, for example, or it's if there's something that really is solving something that they are the prime consumer for, maybe. But it has to really be that perfect bullseye, or else it's mostly likely just going to their assistant.
Well, and I'm hearing you say that, and this is, what we're seeing on the marketing side a lot as well, that, even though you can do a lot of, mass communications, thanks to, AI and technology in general, it doesn't mean that you should, because then it becomes almost spammy in a sense that what really makes a difference is, just like you would understand your target client, understand your target celebrity, And it's really all about personalization, I think I'm hearing you say in that outreach.
I, yes, 100%. Personalization is everything in PR. And AI can actually help with that, but I do think you do need to have a human there as well. AI can help with, generating templates that you then edit and you then use your human brain to vet. But it can speed up that workflow in an efficient way. I just think you need to be very, very smart about how you're using it. There's a platform that I really do like a lot that uses AI, I think, in a very smart way called Pod Pitch that pitches podcasts. Big fan of that platform. That said, you can let AI write all of your communication for you. I tend to go in there and make a lot of edits to it. But it is helpful to see what the AI is generating, what they're pulling out, what they think is going to work. So, I think it's a helpful exercise, but I do think at the end of the day, you need that discerning eye, or it can sound
Yeah,
not so
I
great.
agree. Being on the receiving end of many of those podcast pitches, I can tell you there's some good ones and some not so good ones. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I listened to your podcast with so and so about something completely different, and then let me pitch this random person, and it's like it didn't even make a connection. So,
Yes.
I agree. You still need a human in the loop,
Yes,
I think, for a
but
lot
yeah,
of
you have the actually the ideal perspective here because you received them. It's just you actually have to have listened, or don't attempt to personalize. It's not going to work. So
it. So how would you say, obviously there's been so many changes, we're talking a little bit about AI and there's been, a lot of other shifts in marketing and PR. How do you feel that the media landscapes and content strategies have evolved in PR over the last several years?
yeah, so I think in a lot of ways it can be very overwhelming. And I hear a lot of my colleagues and PR pros say this, that there are so many more platforms with the proliferation of Substack, influencers, you know, niching down of some of the, and there still is, of course, a lot of legacy media. I think I've heard that it's like my reading has doubled, I can't keep up, yada, 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 which I understand. But I really do think it's overall a great opportunity for smart publicists because you can find your niche in a much more like, in an easy and more effective way now than you ever could before. So, that means really taking the time to research again where your consumer is living, what they're reading, and then personalizing, really thoughtful pitches to those people. And that might be, if it's a beauty product, the beauty editor at Allure, of course, but it may also be a sustainable beauty substacker with 15,000 subscribers who, many of whom purchase, a ton from that Substack. So, and really trust and read it every week religiously and have built a relationship with this person. So, I think you can honestly generate the same kind of sales from both of those types of coverage. So, I wouldn't look at one as better than the other. You kind of need both. So yeah, I think there's a ton of opportunity, and I've seen it be so successful. I think it's a big opportunity for brands that are doing it well.
Well, what are your thoughts on Reddit? Because there's a platform where you absolutely have to be authentic or they will jump all over you.
Yes. I love Reddit. I love because of that exact reason. It feels like the one of the last places that you can really find unbiased opinions. So yeah, I mean, from the brand perspective, do not go in there like an advertisement. It simply will not work. It will backfire. Again, look, I think it comes back to that same thing of service. How are you helping the people asking these questions? If you're genuinely giving them advice that is useful to them, if someone's struggling with the interface of your SaaS platform and you're giving them actually helpful advice to a question being asked, great, gold star. um, Versus I'm trying to upsell you, da 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 da, new feature. So I just think it's really like, how am I providing value? And that then, that's the same thing with the social accounts we see doing like, doing so well. They're using humor, but they're also coming back to like, how are we helping our consumer? And how are we showing like, we see you, we see the things that you're thinking about and talking about and laughing about.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're a brand, don't pretend you're not a brand because they'll jump all over you for that as well. Saw a post the other day. Somebody was asking, I can't remember what it was, but they were asking for a recommendation on something. And someone who was clearly a brand, but was not posting from a brand account went in and basically said, "Oh, I recommend this particular, I think it was a SaaS platform,"
Yeah.
and they just absolutely got nailed. It's like, "Oh, that just sounds like it's, somebody selling for the." It's like, don't
And
do that,
yeah,
people.
don't do that. And it's the same like at my agency, we had when we worked with some restaurants, sometimes we'd get that request, like, can the entire team give us 5-star Yelp reviews? And I would always gently say that's like we have a policy against that. First of all, Yelp will flag those reviews. Um,
Yep.
second of all, like that's just like that's not an appropriate ask. And I would say that with kindness and love. But it's never a good idea. For a representative for a brand to leave a review or attempt to pretend they're not. It's not going to work.
It'll backfire sooner than anything.
Yeah.
So when we started our conversation, we were talking about the importance of storytelling. So how do you help clients to translate their true essence into stories so that, the story will reach the right audience, will resonate with the right audience without sacrificing authenticity or clarity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way we typically start, or the way I typically start in my consulting practice, is with a pretty detailed questionnaire. And a lot of the root of what I'm trying to get to is why do you exist? How are you helping your audience? And ultimately, what service are you doing for them? And I think, and how are you different and better from your competitors? I think is the other big one. And a lot of times you'll see solopreneurs and brands tell you a ton of what they're not. We're not this, we're not that, we're not this. I really need to distill it down to what are you? You have to be able to define your value independent of what else is out there. Of course, ultimately, we live in a world filled with brands and other than commerce. But if you can't distill down what you are without saying what you're not, there's work to be done. And ultimately, I think the more specific you can be about the problem you're solving, the better and more successful you're going to be. And yeah, I think a lot of founder-led brands, the nice thing about a lot of the messaging that I think is inherent in founder-led brands is often the founder will have a personal story where they're solving for a personal need. And I think that can be very useful because we're understanding kind of like the mindset of the consumer or the ideal consumer. So ultimately, that's kind of where we start. And then, of course, we drill down the language we want to use, the kind of vocabulary we want to use, where in the market are we? Are we premium? Are we value? And again, then our media strategy has to reflect all of those nuances. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, like we need a founder story, we need a brand story, we need a product story, and then they all need to kind of coexist together.
Yeah. I was talking to a founder the other day, actually will be featured in an upcoming episode. And part of the conversation was around exactly that, the importance of having a really compelling story such that the founder can really become, the evangelist for whatever that need is in the market that they're filling. And if I remember a long time ago, I was helping founders with their pitches, and a lot of the feedback was around, you have to touch a nerve. There has to be some emotion where people go, "Oh yes, I get it, that's different, that sets you apart, that's something that, it resonates with me if I'm, someone who is in your target audience." So it's an art to do that, and it's something that, when you talk about, do we use AI? Do we not? I mean, you can certainly interact with it to get some help, but just it's a real art, I think, to
It is.
carve out that message that where people will say, "Oh, yes, I get it," and the founder can feel confident to evangelize that message.
It really is. I think, and a lot of it is getting to know the founder on a personal level and understand like what makes them tick. Again, sometimes why they think they're doing this is different than why they're really doing it. So it's like part therapist in ways. Because I do think when you can uncover that why in the founder, you'll unlock the why your consumer is purchasing the product as well. If you're doing your job right. So I think they're all very interconnected. So yeah, I do think that a good PR person and a good marketing person in general is definitely playing like a therapist role as well.
Absolutely. One of the things, so we were talking about how, things not to do on Reddit, but what are some other big missteps that you're seeing businesses make in PR or content strategies today, and how do you course correct?
Right. So I think the big one is trying to be everything to everyone. One of my like least favorite phrases that a lot of people use, but for some reason just really irks me. It's like the possibilities are endless. And it's like, no, the possibilities are not endless and they should not be endless. The possibilities are specific and finite. So that's one thing that I am very, here are the use cases for this. Here's why it's interesting. Here's why it's compelling. Really spell that out. But yeah, I think in general, the big thing is like trying to be the every woman or the every man or the every product. When no matter, I mean, of course, there are some products that really do like are four quadrant, as they say, but even that, they're for a specific use case. So I think the more you can drill down on that, the more compelling your media strategy will be, the more clear you'll be about who you should be reaching out to and when, and all of that good stuff. It's just like, don't try to be, oh, this is for women and men from age 10 to 90. Like, it's just, let's get a little bit more specific than that.
What's that old expression? The riches are in the niches.
Yes, yes. And I think I really, really believe that.
I
And
do,
especially in today's world, even more so than ever before.
I do too. So you've had a lot of great experience and you've got much more to go. But what do you hope the next wave of PR talent learns from your journey?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think the big thing is ultimately like work smarter, not harder. I think PR can, if not done, if like you're at the wrong place or maybe you're missing the point, it can be a lot of paper pushing, a lot of reporting and not doing. And I think at the core, like, of course, reporting is so important. I'm not saying otherwise, but at the end of the day, like your job is to be a mouthpiece for this brand. So once you have your strategy set, once you have your outreach list, you should be doing the work, which is reaching out to journalists. And I think the more you can carve out, I'm a big, as I've said already in this interview, a big proponent of carving out heads down time in your calendar. Make sure that you're not just on Zoom all day or in meetings all day. You're actually out there in, whether it's emailing or meeting people for coffee or, meeting people in whatever way is possible for how your job is set up. That's how you're going to be successful is on those based on those relationships and based on that communication. So, if your inbox is mostly, or if your inbox or your Slack or whatever is mostly internal, like that's, you're doing something wrong. So, remember that you are supposed to be out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of being out there, we talk a lot today about personal brands and the importance of personal brands. What are some myths around personal brands that you wish most founders would just drop?
Yeah, yeah. I would say, you don't have to have, a Forbes feature to be a successful founder. I mean, sure, that can be a great moment and, can be wonderful for your business, but you can be just as successful if you are get an amazing trade publication feature on your business. Again, it's back to the niches. I think you don't need to be, in Vogue or in what amazing legacy publications to be successful. Of course, as a publicist, I love getting those big features for my clients. I know they are important and they do serve a purpose, but there's success that is beyond that. And if you start discounting those niche publications that your consumer is actually reading and interacting with, you're missing a giant piece, perhaps the largest piece of the pie, on the PR side. And I think the same comes from like your own brand channels, your LinkedIn, your social. Don't only reach for the highest and the biggest. Think about niching down to where you're going to find your people. And that applies to topics too that you cover. So yeah, I mean, the more specific and niche and interesting and like deep you can think, the more ideally viral you will go.
Yeah, I like that. I like your comment about niching down on topics as well, because if you're trying to talk about everything, and I think this is kind of a tough balance sometimes with personal brands. And maybe you could share your
Yeah.
insights on this, but it's balancing that personal and professional. So, do you talk about your family on social media while you're talking about your company? Do you, don't you, does it matter which platform you're on, what the message looks like? And, are you the expert in one thing, or is it okay to talk about multiple things? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's different calculus for every founder, in all honesty, and you have to kind of make that decision for yourself. I've had some founders who are remarkably candid. We'll talk about money, we'll talk about their family, we'll talk about sex, we'll talk about all sorts of quote, quote, taboo topics and have an incredible voice and reach as a result of that candor. But that has to come naturally to the founder. That has to be the way they are and the way they move through the world, in an authentic way. And that's not everybody. So, I think knowing what you're comfortable and not comfortable talking about is before you go into trying to build your personal brand, or at the very least, once you get started, having a bet, taking the time to think that through is time well spent. Because no, you don't have to talk about all of those things, but if they apply to your story, if they apply to your brand, you should maybe consider whether they're things you can and feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, plan those topics. Do you have, as you think back on your client experiences, do you have a favorite success story that really showed where PR worked in maybe a surprising or an outsized way?
Yeah, I love this question. So this is kind of an old example, but I love it because it was just like such a formative experience for me as a publicist. So I did the launch of this cat cafe in New York City called Meow Parlor. Talk about niche. um, and
Now, do you bring your cat or they supply the cats?
they supply the cats. They're all rescue cats. And you basically pay to come and you can order pastries from a cafe down the street that's separated, obviously, for animal safety and, food safety reasons. Anyway, so it was the first cat cafe in New York City. These are very big in Asia. Anyway, this was probably 10 years ago now. Maybe, yeah, I think about 10 years ago now. But what shocked me is at the time, there was one in San Francisco that got a ton of mainstream press, like we're talking Today Show, etc. So I had a hunch that this was going to be very buzzy, which is why I took on the project. I also had a personal connection to the founders and really enjoyed them and thought they were smart. But a lot of people were like, what are you talking about? But when I tell you the press that we got for this cat cafe, we're talking billions and billions of media impressions. A New York Times glossy front of the style section feature story, the Today Show, the Tonight Show. I mean, literally every placement you can possibly think of. I've truly never and probably will never see a media frenzy like this ever again. We did an opening party for press only. Like there were people waiting outside. It was February. Like it was crazy. And I really do think this goes back to what we've been talking about this whole time about niche. Something that maybe seems weird and funny and like we had very airtight messaging. We had a very smart strategy of who we gave this to first. We had a very thoughtful communication strategy about kind of like how we were rolling it out and when and et cetera, and what people were being invited to. And also a programming calendar like cat yoga and other things that kind of like were tailor made for visuals. Um, yeah, like Rachel Ray came and filmed a whole thing and donated a bunch of cat food. Like
Oh, that's crazy.
it was wild. And
I mean, let me ask you, because the old expression, and I'm sure you'll react to this, no press is bad press. But I mean, so obviously this thing went viral, but was everybody making fun of it, or like did that actually translate to business?
it's a great question. So honestly, the sentiment of the coverage was mostly very positive. I mean, of course, there was a little tongue in cheek, but it was largely positive. So I will say it wasn't just like this is crazy. It was like this is crazy, but also like really thoughtful and well designed. And they have this and that, and these are rescue cats, and there were a lot of things that laddered up to make it smart. So it wasn't just a joke. And I do think that was good storytelling on our side. But I'm not an all press is good press person. I do think you really have to think about what the press is saying. And no, it did. They had wait lists for months. Like it did very much help their business.
That's amazing. Well, if they ever want to branch out, I saw on Instagram a while ago a capybara cafe. I think it was in Asia somewhere. But so, if they want to extend a little bit, that might be
Yeah, no, the
that's
founders are
good
still,
one.
it's still open. They do like a big cat camp event in New York City. Like they've definitely done a lot with it. But yeah, I still will always remember
That's
that
awesome.
initial launch. And there's others than that, but that I think is a fun one, a fun story that you're
I
listening.
love the creativity on that one as well. Well, Rachel, this has been both educational and a lot of fun. I've loved having you on. Where can people reach you if they want to connect?
Thank you so much. No, this was really fun as well for me. I'm at rachelvandolsen.com and Rachel Van Dolsen on LinkedIn as well. Those are my two majors, but I also have an Instagram, which is mostly pictures of dogs and children. But I am per this conversation beefing up my personal brand, so I'll be back there again.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, look forward to continuing our conversations, Rachel. I wish you all the best of luck with your consulting and looking forward to talking again soon. Thanks
Yes,
again.
thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Bye.